Ah, you have come again, my friend. Come in from the cold night air. The wind whispers strange things tonight, does it not? There is a chill in it that speaks of distant mountains and ancient sorrows. But here, within these round walls of earthstone, we are safe and warm. The fire burns low but steady in the hearth, casting gentle shadows that dance upon the curved ceiling like memories come to visit. Settle yourself there, in that old armchair that has cradled so many listeners before you. Draw that wool blanket close about your shoulders. There is no hurry tonight, no urgent errand to call you away. The world beyond these walls can wait until morning, as it always does. For now, we have warmth, we have comfort, and we have time. And tonight, my friend, I must tell you a story that I have long hesitated to speak aloud. It is a tale of darkness, yes, but also of tragedy. Of a spirit that might have been great in service of the light, but instead became the shadow that threatened to engulf all of Middle-earth. Tonight I shall tell you of Sauron. You know the name. Everyone knows the name. It is spoken in whispers and in curses, in the dark corners of taverns and in the councils of kings. Sauron, the Dark Lord Sauron, the deceiver. Sauron, the enemy of all free peoples. But do you know who he truly was? Do you know where he came from, how he fell, what drove him through the long ages of his malice? Do you know the name he bore before all the darkness, when he walked in light and was counted among the faithful servants of creation? I know. I know because I remember. Because I was there at the beginning, before the world was made, when all things were possible and nothing had yet been marred. I remember the great music, the Ainulindal, when El-Vatar gathered all the spirits he had created and bade them sing together the themes of creation. I remember the beauty of that song, the way the melodies wove together into something greater than any single voice could achieve. And I remember the discord that into the music, the harsh notes that clashed against the harmony, the will that sought to dominate rather than to contribute. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me begin at the beginning, as all stories should begin. Let me tell you of Maren. Before the world was made, before time itself had meaning, there existed only El-Vatar, the One, and the Ainur, the spirits he had created from his thought. The Ainur were many, and they were diverse, each bearing within them a fragment of El-Vatar's infinite mind, each gifted with knowledge and power according to their nature. Some were mighty beyond imagining, spirits whose thoughts could shape the very fabric of reality. Others were lesser in power but no less beautiful, no less important to the grand design that El-Vatar was weaving. Among the Ainur, there was a hierarchy of sorts, though hierarchy is perhaps not the right word, for there was no jealousy or competition among them in those early days. The greatest of the Ainur were called the Valar, the powers of the world, and they were 14 in number, 7 lords and 7 queens, each with their own domain of concern and their own gifts. Man was the greatest of them, closest to El-Vatar's mind, lord of the air and the winds and all things that fly. Vada was his queen, she who kindled the stars, whose lies the most terrible of all weapons against the darkness. Olmo was the lord of waters, deep and strange, whose thoughts ran in currents that none could fully fathom. All was the smith, the craftsman, he who delighted in the making of things, in the shaping of matter into forms of beauty and usefulness. And there were others, many others, each with their own nature, their own purposes. But there was also Melkor, the mightiest of all the Valar, whose mind ranged further and whose power exceeded that of any other. Melkor had been given the greatest gifts of any of the Ainur, had been granted knowledge and strength that might have made him the greatest servant of El-Vatar's design. But Melkor was not content to serve. He desired to create according to his own will, to impose his own vision upon reality, rather than to work in harmony with others. And in time that desire would twist into something terrible, something that would bring ruin upon the world and all who dwelt in it. But I am not here to speak of Melkor tonight. Though his shadow falls across this tale, as it fall across all the dark stories of Middle-earth, I am here to speak of another, one who served Melkor, but who began his existence in a very different place. Maren. That was his name in the beginning. Marin the Admirable. Marin the Beautiful. He was a Maya, one of the lesser spirits who served the Vela. And he was numbered among the people of all the Smith. This is important, my friend. Remember it, for the nature that Marin was given at his creation shaped everything that came after, both his fall and his deeds in the fallen state. All was a maker. His joy was in the crafting of things, in taking raw matter and shaping it into forms of beauty and purpose. He delved into the deep places of the earth, seeking out precious metals and gems. He forged wonders beyond counting, tools, andromux, and great works that enriched the world. And his people, the Maya who served him, shared in his love of craft, his devotion to order and precision, his delight in the well-made thing. Marin was the greatest of all's Maya. His skill in smithcraft was surpassed by none save all himself, and in some particular arts, it was whispered that Marin might exceed his master. He had a mind that delighted in order, in systems, in the proper arrangement of all things according to their nature and purpose. He hated waste and inefficiency. He loved the precise and the methodical. He could take chaos and impose upon it a structure that was beautiful in its clarity and its logic. Let me describe to you what Marin was like in those early days, before the shadow fell upon him. For understanding what he was helps us understand what he became. Imagine a spirit of light and fire, beautiful as the dawn, precise as the movement of stars across the heavens. Marin's form in those days was fair beyond measure, radiant with the light of Valinor, clothed in raiments that shimmered at forged gold and polished silver. His eyes burned with intelligence, with purpose, with an intensity that drew others to him and made them want to please him. He was tireless in his work. While other Maya rested or turned to other pursuits, Marin remained at his forge, perfecting his craft, experimenting with new techniques, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. He created tools of surpassing quality, devices that made the work of the Valar easier and more efficient. He organized the stores and workshops of all halls, ensuring that every material was in its proper place, every tool ready when needed, every process optimized for maximum productivity. And he was proud, not with the arrogant pride that Melka displayed, that obvious and ugly vanity that repelled as often as it attracted. Marin's pride was quieter, more subtle, more dangerous. He knew how good he was, knew that his work exceeded that of almost all his fellows, knew that his organizational skills made him indispensable. And deep in his heart, a voice whispered that he could do better, that with the right opportunity, the right resources, the right authority, he could achieve things that would make even the works of the Vela seem crude by comparison. These are not evil qualities, my friend. Indeed, they might be counted virtues in one who uses them rightly. A love of order, a desire for efficiency, a hatred of waste. These things serve the world well when they are guided by wisdom and tempered by compassion. But in Marin, they would become the seeds of his corruption. For Marin's love of order was not balanced by a love of freedom. His desire for efficiency did not include tolerance for the messiness of independent wills, for the chaos that inevitably arises when beings are allowed to choose their own paths. He looked upon the world that was being shaped, upon the discord that Melka had introduced into the great music, and he saw something that offended his deepest nature. He saw imperfection. He saw systems that did not work as they should. He saw beings that did not conform to any orderly pattern. And he began to think that perhaps things could be arranged better. This is how the fall begins, my friend. Not with a sudden plunge into darkness, not with a conscious choice to embrace evil. It begins with a thought, a small dissatisfaction, a whisper that says this could be better. And from that whisper grows a line that slowly chokes out all the light. In those early days, before the world was fully made, Melka walked among the Aenir and spoke with them. He was still counted among the Valar then, still permitted in their councils, though his discord in the great music had already set him apart. And Melka was cunning. He could see into the hearts of others and find the cracks where his influence might seep in. He saw Marin's love of order, his frustration with imperfection, his desire to impose system upon chaos. and he whispered to him. What Melkor whispered I do not know. No one knows, save perhaps Marin himself, and he has never spoken of it. But I can imagine, for I have seen how Melkor worked upon others, how he turned their virtues into weapons against them. He would have spoken of the inefficiency of Alvatar's design, of the waste inherent in granting freedom to beings who would inevitably misuse it. He would have painted a vision of a world made perfect, a world where everything functioned according to plan, where every being knew its place and served its purpose without deviation. He would have offered Marin power, the power to achieve this vision, the power to reshape reality according to his own understanding of how things should be. Perhaps Melkor spoke of the Valar themselves, of their limitations and their failures. Look, he might have said, at how poorly they managed the world entrusted to them. Look at the disorder, the conflict, the waste of potential. You could do better, Marin. You understand systems in ways that man and the others never will. You could bring order to chaos, efficiency to waste, push to imperfection. All you need is the freedom to act, the authority to implement your vision. Perhaps he spoke of all of Marin's own master. Does all appreciate your talents? Does he give you the recognition you deserve? Does he understand how far beyond your fellows you have already advanced? No, he takes your work for granted, uses your ability without acknowledging them, holds you back when you could achieve so much more. Perhaps he spoke of destiny, of fate, of the inevitable victory of the strong over the weak. This world is not built for peace, Marin. It is built for struggle, for competition, for the triumph of those with the will to seize what they want. The Valar pretend otherwise, speak of harmony and cooperation, but they are deceiving themselves and everyone else. In the end, power is all that matters, and I offer you power beyond your wildest dreams. Whatever the specifics of Melkor's temptation, its essence was always the same: the corruption of virtue into vice, the twisting of genuine gifts into tools of evil, the exploitation of genuine concerns to serve malevolent purposes. Marin's love of order became a contempt for freedom. His desire for efficiency became a willingness to use any means to achieve his ends. His pride in his achievements became a conviction that he deserved to rule, and Marin listened. Oh, he did not fall at once, none of them did. The corruption of a spirit is a gradual thing, a slow erosion of principle, a step-by-step journey away from the light. First, Marin merely listened to Melkor's words. Then he began to think about them, to turn them over in his mind, to consider whether perhaps Melkor had a point. Then he began to speak with Melkor more frequently, to seek out his company, to learn from his perspective. And gradually, imperceptibly, Marin's allegiance shifted. By the time the Ainur entered into Arda, the world that had been created for the great music, Marin was already Melkor's creature. He had not yet revealed himself, had not yet openly declared his allegiance to the darkness. He still walked among the mire of all, still worked in the forges and the smithies of the Valar. But his heart had turned, and it was only a matter of time before his actions followed. The corruption of Marin was complete by the time of the years of the lamps. Those early ages when two great lights illuminated Arda from towers in the north and south. Melkor had established his fortress of Utumno in the far north, beyond the reach of the lamp's light, and there he gathered those Ainur who had fallen with him. And Marin went to him, openly now, abandoning his place among the servants of the Valar and taking his stand beside the rebel. Why? Why did Marin choose darkness over light? It is a question I have pondered for ages beyond counting, and I am not certain I ever found a satisfying answer. Part of it was surely Melkor's manipulation, the subtle poisoning of Marin's thoughts over long ages of whispered temptation. Part of it was Marin's own nature, his love of order twisted into a desire for control, his hatred of inefficiency transformed into contempt for freedom. Part of it may simply have been that Marin believed Melkor would win, that the new order Melkor promised would indeed come to pass, and that it was better to be on the winning side than to cling to a cause that seemed doomed to fail. But I think in the end, the truest answer is this. Marin fell because he forgot that he was not the measure of all things. He looked upon the world with his own eyes and judged it by his own standards, and he found it wanting. He did not consider that his vision might be limited, that his understanding might be incomplete, that the apparent imperfections he saw might in fact be necessary to some larger design that he could not perceive. He set himself up as the arbiter of what was good and what was not, and in doing so, he opened the door to every evil that followed. This is the first great lesson of Marin's fall, my friend, and it is one that every being in Middle-earth would do well to remember. Pride. The conviction that we know better than those set above us, that our wisdom is sufficient to judge the whole of creation. This is the root of all darkness. Melkor fell because of it. Marin fell because of it. And countless others have followed them down that same path, each believing themselves wise, each convinced that they alone could see the truth. But let me continue with the tale, for we have barely begun, and the night is long. In Utumno, Marin became Melkor's chief lieutenant. His organizational skills, his understanding of systems and structures, his ability to impose order upon chaos, all of these made him invaluable to his new master. Where Melkor was driven by rage and spite, by a hatred of all things that he had not made, Marin brought method and purpose. He designed the dungeons of Utumno. He organized the legions of corrupted spirits and twist breaches that Melkor was breeding in the darkness. He created systems of communication and command that allowed Melkor's will to be imposed across vast distances. Utumno itself was a marvel of dark engineering. Marin had helped design its deepest levels, those vast caverns where even the light of thought could not penetrate. He had created systems to channel the heat of the Urfa into forges where new horrors could be made. He had organized the breeding pits where orcs multiplied like insects, each generation slightly more numerous than the last. He had established the communication networks that allowed Melkor to coordinate attacks across hundreds of leagues, striking the Valar's work in a dozen places simultaneously. The fortress stretched down into the depths of the world, its lowest levels reaching places where even the Valar had never ventured. There, in the ultimate darkness, Marin conducted experiments that would have horrified even his corrupted master. He studied the binding of spirits to matter, learning how to trap a soul in a body that was not its own, how to create servitors that were utterly obedient because they had no will left to resist. He experimented with the mixing of forms, creating creatures that were neither beast nor spirit but something new. Something terrible, something that had never existed before, and should never have existed at all. And he learned. Oh, how he learned. Marin's mind was a furnace, endlessly consuming knowledge, and transforming it into power. He studied the arts of domination, learning how to bend the wills of lesser beings to his purposes. He delved into the secrets of matter and spirit, discovering ways to corrupt and twist that even Melkor had not imagined. He experimented with binding, with the forging of chains that could hold not just bodies but souls. He became, in time, the greatest sorcerer in order, his knowledge surpassed only by the Valar themselves. The corruption of Marin was not merely a matter of allegiance. It was a transformation of his very being. The light that had once shone in him grew dim, replaced by a cold fire that burned without warmth, that illuminated without revealing. His beauty did not fade, not at first, but it became terrible rather than inspiring, the beauty of a blade rather than a flower, of a trap rather than a gift. Those who looked upon him felt drawn and repelled in equal measure, attracted by his fairness and terrified by what lay beneath it. And he became Sauron. That name, Sauron, means the abhorred in the elven tongue. It was given to him by the elves, who learned to their sorrow just how terrible he could be. But Marin himself did not reject the name. He wore it like a mantle, a declaration of what he had become and what he intended to do. He was no longer Marin the Admirable. He was Sauron the Terrible, the Lieutenant of Morgoth, the abhorred of all free peoples. Let me tell you of the First Age, my friend, for it was in that long and terrible time that Sauron first proved himself as a power in his own right. Morgoth, as Melkor was now called, had stolen the Silmarils, the great jewels that contained the light of the two trees of Valinor. He had slain Finn, high-kin of the Noldor, and he had fled to Middle-earth with his stolen treasures. The Noldor had pursued him, driven by Fëanor's terrible oath, and so began the wars that would ravage the lands west of the Blue Mountains for more than 500 years. Sauron served Morgoth throughout these wars, but his role was not that of a battlefield commander. That was not his nature, not his strength. Sauron was the shadow behind the throne, the organizer of armies, the keeper of prisoners, the master of spies. When Morgoth needed information about his enemies, it was Sauron who obtained it. When captives were taken, it was Sauron who extracted what they knew. When infiltrators were needed to spread discord among the elven kingdoms, it was Sauron who trained them and sent them forth. And when Morgoth needed a fortress to guard the western approaches to Angband, his great fortress in the Iron Mountains, it was Sauron who was given the task. The tower was called Tol in Garhoth, the Isle of Werewolves, though it was known by other names as well. It stood upon an island in the river Sirion, blocking the pass through which any army from the west must march to reach Angband. Sauron filled it with his servants, werewolves bred in the pits of Angband, vampires that drank the blood of the living, spirits malice bound into forms of shadow and terror. And he ruled there as a Dark Lord in his own right, second only to Morgoth himself. It was at Tol, in Garhoth, that Sauron first encountered those who would prove to be his most persistent enemies. Beren, a mortal man of the house of Beor, had come to Doriath and fallen in love with Elgithien, daughter of King Thingol and the Myrmidon. Thingol had demanded an impossible bride princess, one of the Silmarils from Morgoth's crown, and Beren, fool or hero depending on how you view such things, had set out to obtain it. He was aided by Finrod Felagund, the elven king who had sworn friendship to Beren's house. Together they ventured toward Angband, but they were captured by Sauron's servants and brought before him. Sauron recognized Finrod, and knew that he was an enemy of great importance, and he desired to know why an elven king would be traveling in disguise toward Morgoth's realm. What followed was a duel of songs, a contest of power between Sauron and Finrod. They sang against each other, each weaving spells of revelation and concealment, each trying to break the other's will. The songs are remembered still. In the ancient lays of the Elves, he chanted a song of wizardry, of piercing, opening, of treachery, revealing, uncovering, betraying. Then sudden Felagund, their swaying, sang in answer a song of staying, resisting, battling against power, of secrets kept, strength like a tower. Back and forth they went, Sauron attacking, Feng defending, each drawing upon the deepest wells of their power. And in the end, Sauron prevailed. His will was the stronger, his knowledge of dark arts the deeper. Finrod's disguise was stripped away, and Sauron knew who his prisoners were, if not why they had come. He cast them into the deepest dungeons of Tol, in Garhoth, into pits of darkness where no light ever came. And one by one he sent his werewolves to devour them, hoping to break their spirits, to make them reveal their purpose. Finrod's companions died, one after another, until only Finrod and Beren remained. And when the werewolf came for Beren, Finrod burst his chains through sheer force of will and fought the beast with his bare hands. He killed the werewolf, but the werewolf killed him too. Finrod Felagund, noblest of the Noldren princes, died in the darkness of Sauron's dungeon, having given his life for a mortal man he had sworn to protect. His sacrifice was not in vain, for Beren survived, though he had lost everything that made his quest seem possible. But Elrithien was coming. Aldrithien Tingviel, the fairest being ever to walk beneath the stars, had learned of Beren's capture. She came to Tol, in Garth, accompanied only by Hon, the great hound of Valinor, who had once served Orum the hunter. And there, before the gates of Sauron's tower, she faced the Lord of Werewolves himself. Sauron sent his wolves against her, one after another, each greater than the last. And the On slew them all, his jaws breaking their necks, his strength exceeding even the mightiest of Sauron's creatures. Let me tell you of those wolves, my friend, for they were no ordinary beasts. Sauron had bred them the pits of Angband, had twisted the spirits of corrupted Maer into bestial forms, had bound fell creatures into bodies of fur and fang and ravenous hunger. They were wolves in the truest sense. Not men who became wolves, but spirits of malice, who had taken the shape of wolves and made that shape terrible beyond imagining. Their eyes burned with an intelligence that was not animal but demonic. Their jaws could crack iron. Their howls could drive men mad with fear. Droglin was the greatest of them, the sire of all wolves, a beast of such size and ferocity that even the orcs fled from his shadow. Sauron had created him as a captain of his wolves, a general of fanged armies, and Droglin had led countless hunts through the dark forests of Beleriand, dragging back captives to Tol in Garth's dungeons, spreading terror wherever his pack ran. Hong killed Droglin. The great hound of Valinor broke the werewolf lord's neck with a single bite, and Droglin crawled back to his master's feet and died there, whimpering out a warning with his last breath. At last, Sauron himself came forth, taking the form of a werewolf greater than any that had ever been, a beast of shadow and malice that had torn apart whole companies of elven warriors. But Huan was no ordinary hound. He had been born in Valinor, had run beside Orome in hunts that ranged across the world, and it had been prophesied that he would not be killed by any wolf, and that his death would only come when he faced the greatest wolf that ever lived. Sauron was mighty, but he was not that wolf. The two fought in a battle that shook the tower to its foundations, and in the end, Huan's jaws closed upon Sauron's throat. Sauron knew fear then, true fear, perhaps for the first time since he had left the light. He shifted form, trying to escape Huan's grip, becoming serpent and monster and phantom in turn. But Huan held on, and Eldrithian stood over them, and her power rejoined his binding Sauron in place. And Eldrithian gave Sauron a choice. He could yield to her the mastery of Tol, in Garth, surrendering the tower and all within it, or she would strip the flesh from his bones and send his naked spirit howling back to Morgoth in shame. Sauron considered. He weighed his options with the cold calculation that was his nature. If he yielded, he would lose the tower but keep his form and his power. If he refused, he might indeed be destroyed, cast out of his body as Eldrithian threatened, forced to return to Morgoth in defeat. And Morgoth did not suffer failure kindly. The torment that awaited him in Angband might be worse than any shame. He yielded. Sauron surrendered the tower and fled, taking the form of a vampire, a great bat, winged shadow that flew eastward toward Angband. But his courage failed him before he reached Morgoth's gates. He knew what awaited him there, knew the punishment that his master would inflict upon a servant who had been defeated by a hound. And so he hid himself, lurking in the forests and the dark places of the world, waiting for Morgoth's wrath to pass. This was Sauron's first great defeat, and it taught him lessons that he would never forget. He had been overcome not by force of arms, but by love and loyalty, by the power of those who fought for something greater than themselves. Berin's love for Eldrithian, Eldrithian's love for Beren, Finrod's faithfulness to his oath, Huan's devotion to his mistress, these things had proven stronger than all his sorcery and all his wolves. Sauron did not understand love. He never had, and he never would. But he learned to respect it as a force to be reckoned with, a power that could not be commanded or controlled, but only countered by cunning and deception. In the ages to come, he would build his strategies around this understanding, seeking to corrupt love rather than confront it, to twist loyalty into chains, to make the very bonds that held the free peoples together into weapons against them. The First Age ground on toward its terrible conclusion. The elven kingdoms fell, one by one, their armies broken by Morgoth's endless hosts. Gondolin fell, Nargothrond fell, Doriath fell. The sons of Ephonor, driven by their oath, committed atrocity after atrocity, murdering their own kindred in pursuit of the Silmarils they could never possess. The world was drowning in blood and fire, and Morgoth's victory seemed assured. But then the host of the West came. The Valar had long refused to intervene directly in the wars of Middle-earth, for their power was so great that they feared to unleash it upon the lands they sought to protect. But the plea of Rendil, the half-elven mariner who sailed to Valinor bearing a Silmaril upon his brow, moved them to action. They came in their might. The Valar and the Maiar and the hosts of the elves who had never left the blessed realm. They broke Morgoth's armies like wave breaking upon a rock. They cast down Angband and destroyed Thangorodrim, the three great peaks that crowned Morgoth's fortress. They captured Morgoth himself and bound him in chains of his own making, and they thrust him through the door of night into the void beyond the world. The First Age was ended, and Sauron was still hiding in the shadows. When the host of the West came to Middle-earth, when Morgoth's servants were hunted and destroyed, Sauron emerged from wherever he had concealed himself and did something unexpected. He came before Enoa, the herald of man, and he surrendered. He fell upon his face and begged forgiveness for his crimes. He claimed that he had been milled by Morgoth, that he had been forced to serve the Dark Lord against his will, that he desired only to make amends and to serve the Valar faithfully in whatever task they might assign him. What was in his heart at that moment, I do not know. Perhaps there was genuine repentance, a flickering hope that he might yet turn from the darkness he had embraced. Perhaps it was pure calculation, an attempt at destruction that had overtaken his former master. Perhaps it was a mixture of both, for even the darkest spirits sometimes catch glimpses of the light they have abandoned. Enu considered Sauron's surrender. He was the herald of man, not the king of the Valar himself, and he did not have the authority to pardon Sauron's crimes. He told Sauron that he must return to Valinor and submit to the judgment of the Valar, to face whatever punishment they deemed appropriate for his long service to Morgoth. And Sauron refused. He could not bear the thought of humiliation, of standing before the Valar as a criminal awaiting sentence. His pride, that same pride that had led him to Morgoth in the first place, rose up and choked whatever repentance might have stirred in his heart. He had been Morgoth's lieutenant, second only to the greatest of the Valar, and now he was being told to crawl back to those he had defied and beg for their mercy. No, he would not do it. He could not do it. And so Sauron fled again, vanishing into the wilds of Middle-earth, hiding himself from the searching eyes of the Valar. And the moment passed. Whatever chance there might have been for Sauron's redemption, it was lost in that moment. Buried beneath his pride and his fear, and his stubborn refusal to accept what he had become, the Valar did not pursue him on what they came to do. Morgoth was defeated, the First Age was ended, and the peoples of Middle-earth were free to rebuild their shattered lands. Perhaps they assumed that Sauron, stripped of his master's support, would fade into insignificance. Perhaps they believed that his own corruption would eventually destroy him. Or perhaps they simply had other concerns, other duties that called them back to Valinor. Whatever the reason, Sauron was left alone in Middle-earth, alone with his malice and his cunning and his boundless patience, and slowly, carefully began to rebuild his power. Let me tell you of the Second Age, my friend, for it was in that long time of seeming peace that Sauron achieved his greatest and most terrible triumph. The Second Age began with hope. The Valar, moved by the valor of those who had fought against Morgoth, raised a new land from the sea as a gift to the faithful among men. This was Endi Menna, the land of the star, an island realm closer to Valinor than to Middle-earth. The Enmenwanreens became the greatest of mortal peoples, blessed with long life and wisdom beyond any of their kindred who remained in Middle-earth. The elves, too, prospered in the early years of the Second Age. Gil-galad established his realm in Lindon, west of the Blue Mountains, and he was counted the High King of the Noldor in Middle-earth. Other elven realms arose in the lands that had survived the ruin of Beleriand region, near the western walls of the Misty Mountains, where the elven smiths put their craft. Rivendell, the hidden valley where errant half elven would one day rule, and far to the east, the woodland realms where the Sylvan elves dwelt beneath the trees. For nearly 500 years, Sauron remained hidden. He lurked in the far east, beyond the knowledge of the elves and men of the west, slowly gathering his strength, slowly drawing to himself the scattered remnants of Morgoth's servants, orcs and trolls. Those bred and corrupted by the first Dark Lord, still dwelt in the dark places of the world, and they remembered Sauron, remembered his power and his cruelty. They came to him, and he organized them, built them into armies, prepared them for the wars he knew would come. But Sauron did more than merely gather armies in those hidden years. He studied, he planned, he learned from Morgoth's failures and resolved not to repeat them. Morgoth, you see, had been a creature of overwhelming force and overwhelming pride. He had sought to dominate through sheer power, crushing all opposition beneath his iron heel, and for a time it had worked. But in the end, the Valar had proven mightier, and all of Morgoth's strength had not been enough to save him from defeat and imprisonment. Sauron saw that a different approach was needed. He did not have Morgoth's raw power, could not match the greatest of the Valar in direct confrontation, but he had something that Morgoth had always lacked: patience, subtlety, the willingness to work slowly, to build his power gradually, to undermine his enemies from within rather than assaulting them from without. In the darkness of the East, Sauron experimented with new forms of corruption. He found that he could influence the minds of lesser beings without dominating them completely, could plant seeds of doubt that would grow over years into full-blown treachery. He learned to read the hearts of others, to sense their weaknesses and their wants, to offer them exactly what they desired most, and thereby bind them to his service. He also explored the deepest mysteries of binding-making. The rings of power were not a sudden inspiration, but the culmination of centuries of research, of experiments with lesser artifacts, of studying the ways that spirit could be bound to matter, and matter could be imbued with power. Sauron spent those hidden years perfecting his craft, preparing for the great work that would become the foundation of his power. And all the while he watched. Through spies and sorcery, he kept his eye upon the west, marking the growth of the elven realms, the rise of Endrumena, the movements of his enemies. He was building a picture of the world he intended to conquer, identifying weaknesses he could exploit, opportunities he could seize. But Sauron was wiser than Morgoth had been. He understood that raw force alone would not suffice to conquer Middle-earth, not while the Endrumenians stood as allies of the elves, not while the Valar still watched from the west. He needed other weapons, subtler tools, means of undermining his enemies from within rather than crushing them from without. And so, around the year 12 of the Second Age, Sauron conceived his greatest scheme. He would not fight the elves directly. He would deceive them. He would give them gifts that would become chains. He would teach them secrets that would become the doom. He took a fair form, the fairest he had ever worn, appearing as a being of great beauty and wisdom. He called himself Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, and he claimed to be an emissary of the Valar, sent to help the elves heal the hurts of the world and preserve the beauty they loved. And he went to the elves with his lies upon his lips and his treachery in his heart. Not all the elves would deceive. Gil, Galad, High King of the Noldor, refused to receive him. There was something about Anatar that troubled the king, something false that beneath fair exterior that his heart misgave him to trust. Elrond, too, was suspicious, and Galadriel most of all. She had seen too much in her long ages of life, had experienced too many betrayals, to be easily taken in by fair words and a beautiful face. She counseled strongly against trusting this stranger, against accepting his gifts or learning his secrets. But the smiths of Eregion were more receptive. Eregion was a realm founded by Noldrin elves who had inherited the craft, love of their ancestors. They were descendants who had learned their trade from All himself, in the blessed realm before the exile, and among them was Celebrimbor, grandson of Efinor, the greatest smith of his age. Celebrimbor bore the burden of his grandfather's legacy, the memory of the Silmarils and the terrible price that had been paid for them. And he yearned to prove himself, to create works that might rival or even surpass those of Ef and Anna, to redeem his family name through the beauty of his craft. When Anatar came to Eregion with knowledge of smithcraft, beyond any the elves had ever known, Celebrimbor listened. The stranger taught techniques that the elves had never mastered, secrets of metallurgy and enchantment that seemed to offer solutions to the great sorrow of the Elves. The fading of all things they loved, the slow decay of beauty in a world that grew ever older and colder. For nearly 300 years Anatar and the smiths of their worked together. They experimented, they refined, they pushed the boundaries of what was possible. And gradually, through long study and careful development, they learned to make rings of power. The lesser rings came first, simple things compared to what would follow, but already powerful beyond the ordinary works of Evan craft. Then came the 7 rings designed to enhance the natural abilities of their bearers, to grant them power over the world and the beings within it. Then came the 9 rings of even greater might, capable of extending life itself, of granting their wearers power that had previously been the province of the Elder alone. And then came the 3. The 3 rings of the Elves were different from the others. They were made by Celebrimbor alone, without Anatar's direct assistance, using the knowledge Anatar had taught but guided Elves' own purposes. Narya, the ring of fire; Nenya, the ring of water; Vilya, the ring of air. These were made for preservation, for healing, for the protection of all that was beautiful and good in the world. They were the purest of the rings of power, untouched by Sauron's hand, embodying the highest aspirations of the elven smiths. But even the 3 were bound by what came next, for Sauron had not taught the elves ring craft out of friendship or generosity. He had done so with a purpose, a terrible purpose that he revealed in the year 1600 of the Second Age. In that year, in the fires of Orodruin in the land of Mordor, Sauron forged the One Ring. Into this ring, Sauron poured much of his own native power. He diminished himself in making it, bound a great part of spirit into that small band of gold. But in exchange, he created an artifact of tremendous might, a master ring that would dominate all the others, that would bend the wills of the bearers to his purposes, that would make him lord of all who wore rings touched by his influence. This was the crucial moment of Sauron's existence, the point from which there could be no return. By putting so much of himself into the ring, Sauron tied his fate to it forever. While the ring existed, he could not be truly killed. His physical form might be destroyed, his armies might be scattered, his fortresses might be cast down, but his spirit would jar, bound to the ring, waiting for the day when he could rebuild his power. But this came at a terrible cost. If the ring was destroyed, Sauron would be destroyed with it. There would be no return, no recovery, no second chance. The ring was both his greatest strength and his greatest vulnerability. Why did he take such a risk? Why did he bind himself so completely to a single object? An object that could be lost or stolen or destroyed. The answer lies in Sauron's nature, in his absolute confidence in his own abilities. He could not imagine that anyone would be capable of destroying the ring once it was made. He had created it to be indestructible except in the fires of Mount Doom. And Mount Doom was in the heart of his realm, guarded by his armies and his sorceries. Who could possibly reach it? Who could possibly succeed in casting the ring into the flames? And even if some hero did manage to reach Mount Doom, the ring itself would prevent its own destruction. Its power over the mind of mortals was so great that no one who carried it all that way, who bore its weight and felt its whispers and gazed upon its beauty, could possibly bring themselves to throw it into the fire. The ring would save itself, would bend its bearer to its will at the crucial moment, would survive. So Sauron believed. And for more than 3,000 years he was right. The ring was lost, yes, but not destroyed. It survived in the waters of the Anduin, survived in Gollum's cave beneath the misty mountains, survived in Bilbo's pocket and Frodo's keeping. At each moment when it might have been destroyed, it preserved itself, manipulating its bearers, arranging circumstances to ensure its own survival, until it encountered something it did not expect, until it met hobbits. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all and in the darkness bind them. When Sauron first put on the One Ring, the elves perceived it immediately. They felt his mind reaching out toward them through the rings they wore, felt his dark will pressing against their own. felt the chains of domination tightening around them. And they were horrified. They removed the rings instantly, hiding them away in secret places where Sauron could not find them. The three, being the mostest and the most resistant to his influence, were given to the wisest and most powerful of the Elder to guard. But for the 7 and the 9, it was already too late. They had been given to the lords of dwarves and men, and Sauron demanded them back. War followed. The War of the Elves and Sauron it was called, and it was terrible indeed. Sauron's forces swept out of Mordor and fell upon a region with fury and malice. The realm of the elven smiths was destroyed utterly, its cities burned, its people scattered or slain. Let me tell you of that war, for it shaped the world we know today and set the stage for all the conflicts that would follow. When Sauron first put on the ring and the elves perceived his treachery, they had a brief window of time in which they might have organized a defense. But Sauron moved faster than they expected. He had been preparing for this moment for centuries, had positioned his armies, had laid the groundwork for a swift and devastating assault. Before the elves could properly respond, his forces were already on the march. The region fell first. Sauron had a particular hatred for the land where he had been deceived into revealing his secrets, where Celebrimbor had learned enough to create the 3 rings without his direct guidance. His armies surrounded the elven realm and attacked from all sides simultaneously. The smiths of a region fought bravely, but they were craftsmen, not warriors, and they were vastly outnumbered. Celebrimbor himself was captured. Sauron wanted the 3 rings, those untainted creations that had been made without his direct touch, and he believed that Celebrimbor would tell him where they had been hidden. He was wrong. Celebrimbor endured tortures that I not have words to describe. Sauron brought all his knowledge of pain and domination to bear upon the greatest smith of the age, seeking to break his will, to force him to reveal the location of the 3. But Celebrimbor, grandson of Eanor, heir to the stubbornness and pride of that terrible house, refused to speak. In the end, Sauron killed him. Celebrimbor was captured, tortured for the location of the 3 rings, and killed when he refused to reveal their hiding places. His body was borne upon a pole as a banner by Sauron's armies, a sign to all the elves of what awaited those who defied the Lord of the Rings. The war might have ended with the complete destruction of the elves in Middle-earth, but for the intervention of the Invermarines. They sent a great fleet to the aid of their allies, and Sauron's armies were broken, driven back to Mordor. But Sauron still had the 1 ring, and with it, much of his power remained intact. He retreated to his dark tower of Barad-dûr and prepared for the next phase of his plan. The 7 rings had been given to lords of the 7 houses of the dwarves. Sauron had hoped to dominate them as he planned to dominate the elves, but he found the dwarves unexpectedly resistant to his influence. Their minds were tough and unyielding, shaped by all himself to resist domination. They could not be turned into wraiths as men could, but the ring still had power over them, enhancing their native greed, inflaming their desire for gold and precious things. Let me tell you more of the dwarves and their relationship with the 7 rings, for it is a tale of gold and greed and eventual ruin that has lessons for us all. The dwarves were created by all, the same worm Sauron had once served in happier days. All had made them strong and stubborn, resistant to outside influence, fiercely independent. These qualities served the dwarves well in many ways, allowing them to endure hardships that would have broken other peoples, to persist in their labors when all hope seemed lost. But these same qualities made them difficult to corrupt through the direct domination that worked so well on men. Sauron discovered this when the 7 rings failed to enslave their bearers as the 9 had enslaved the mortal kings. The dwarves who wore the 7 did not fade into wraithhood. They did not become servants of Sauron's will. Their minds remained their own, resistant to his whispering, impervious to his commands. But the rings were not without effect. They amplified what was already present in the dwarven nature, and what was most present was a love of gold and precious things. This love, which in moderation was simply a delight in fine craftsmanship and beautiful objects, became under the ring's influence an all-consuming obsession. The dwarf lords who wore the seven became consumed by greed, their desire for treasure growing without limit. Their willingness to do whatever was necessary to acquire more gold, overwhelming all other considerations. They delved deeper into the earth than any had gone before, seeking new veins of ore, new deposits of gems, new sources of wealth to add to their ever-growing hoards. They grew suspicious of their neighbors, even their own kin, fearing that others might covet their treasures, might try to steal what was rightfully theirs. They surrounded themselves with guards and traps and sealed doors, spending more and more of their time counting their gold and less living their lives. And their hoards attracted a dwarf. The dwarves who wore the seven amassed hoards of treasure, and those hoards attracted dragons. One by one, the great dwarf kingdoms fell, their halls burned and the treasures scattered, their rings either consumed by dragon fire or recovered by Sauron himself. The 9 rings had been given to great lords among men, kings and sorcerers of renown, and they proved far more susceptible to Sauron's power than the dwarves had been. The rings granted them long life, yes, stretching their mortal spans far beyond their natural limits. But it was not true immortality they received. It was a shadow of life, a slow fading into wraithhood, a gradual transformation into creatures neither living nor dead. The process was terrible to behold, though none who witnessed fully understood what they were seeing until it was too late. At first, the rings seemed to be exactly what they promised, gifts of power and long life. The lords who wore them found their strength increased, their senses sharpened, their authority over others enhanced. They could command with a word where before they had needed armies. They could see in the dark, hear whispers from miles away, sense the thoughts and fears of those around them. They stopped aging. Their bodies remained strong and vital, even as their contemporaries grew old and died. But the rings were not gifts. Slowly, so slowly that the change was imperceptible at first, the lords began to fade. Their forms grew less substantial. Shadows gathered around them, clinging to their bodies even in bright sunlight. They began to see things that others could not see, a second world that existed alongside the one they had always known, a world of ghosts and whispers and watching eyes. This was the Wraith world, the unseen realm where spirits dwelt, and the rings were pulling them inexorably into it. Their faces changed. The color drained from them, leaving skin that was gray and translucent, stretched tight over bones that seemed more prominent with each passing year. Their eyes lost their natural color and began to with a cold light that had nothing of life in it. Their voices grew hollow, echoing as if coming from a great distance even when they spoke to those standing beside them. And worst of all, they began to hear the voice of Sauron. At first, it was just a whisper, a suggestion that seemed to come from their own thoughts. But as the years passed and their transformation progressed, the voice grew louder, more insistent, more impossible to ignore. Sauron spoke to them through the rings, commanded them, directed, bent their wills to his purposes. They found themselves doing things they did not remember deciding to do, traveling to places they had no reason to visit, speaking words that were not their own. They tried to resist some of them. They tried to remove the rings, to throw them away, to flee from the shadow that was consuming them. But it was too late. The rings had become part of them, had merged with their very spirits. To remove the ring was agony beyond description. To be separated from it was to feel as if a part of oneself had been torn away. And always, they found themselves putting the ring back on, returning to its embrace, submitting once more to its power. One by one, the 9 lords passed out of the world of the living and into the world of shadows. They became the Nosdagul, the ring wraiths, bound forever to the will of Sauron and the power of the One Ring. They lost their names, their identities, everything that had it them who they were. They became extensions of Sauron's will, instruments of his malice, the most terrible servants of the Dark Lord. The Witch King was the greatest of them, a sorcerer of Anmena, who had sought power above all else and had found it, at a cost he could never have imagined. He alone among the nine retained some shadow of independent will, some remnant of the ambition that had driven him in life. But even he was utterly subservient to Sauron, bound by chains stronger than any iron. For more than 1,000 years Sauron built his power in Mordor. He fortified the passes. He bred armies of orcs and trolls. He gathered to himself all the dark things that lurked in the shadows of Middle-earth. And all the while, his Nazgul rode forth on missions of terror, spreading fear and death across the lands. But Sauron was not content merely to rule Mordor. He desired dominion over all of Mid-earth, and that meant defeating the Inmenanoreans, who had grown into the greatest power the world had ever seen. And here, my friend, Sauron achieved his most audacious and daunting victory. The kings of Endimena had grown proud over the centuries. They had conquered much of the coastlands of Middle-earth, establishing colonies and extracting tribute from the lesser men who dwelt there. They had grown rich beyond measure, powerful beyond challenge, and they had begun to chaffer against the one limitation placed upon them, the ban of the Valar, which forbade them from sailing west to the Blessed Realm, from seeking the immortality that was granted the elves but denied to men. Ar-Pharazôn was the greatest and proudest of the Imenwalreen kings, and when he learned that Sauron had declared himself the king of men and the lord of the earth, he was not frightened but enraged. How dare this servant of Morgoth set himself up as his equal? How dare he claim dominion over lands that belonged to Endimena? Ar-Pharazôn assembled the greatest fleet that Endimena had produced and sailed to Middle-earth with overwhelming force. Sauron's armies took one look at the host arrayed against them and fled, and Sauron himself, cunning as ever, surrendered. This was not defeat but strategy. Sauron knew that he could not defeat Endimena by force of arms, not while the Endimenningreens stood at the height of their power. But he could defeat them from within, corrupt them, turn their own pride and fear against them. He allowed himself to be taken captive, to be brought back to Endimena as a trophy Ar-Pharazôn's triumph. Within 3 years, the prisoner had become the counselor. Within 50, he was the power behind the throne. Let me tell you how this transformation occurred, for it is a masterpiece of manipulation, a study in how the strongest can be corrupted through their own desires. Sauron began with humility, with the appearance of submission. He praised Ar-Pharazôn's wisdom and strength. He marveled at the beauty of Endimena, at the achievements of its people. He presented himself as someone who had much to offer, but who was grateful simply to be in the presence of such greatness. He made himself useful, offering advice on matters of statecraft, sharing knowledge of Middle-earth and its peoples, demonstrating his value as a counselor. And slowly, imperceptibly, he began to plant his seeds of corruption. He noticed that the Endimennarines feared death. It was their great weakness, the shadow that fell across even their brightest days. They lived longer than any other men, 3 times the span of lesser mortals, but still they died. And as the centuries passed, the fear of death had grown among them, transforming from a distant concern into an obsession that colored everything they did. Sauron fed that fear. He spoke of the unfairness of mortality, of how the elves lived forever while men faded and died. He questioned why the Valar had given this gift to the firstborn, but denied it to men who were no less worthy. He hinted that there were secrets the Valar kept hidden, knowledge that could extend life indefinitely if only the Endimennarines were brave enough to seek it. He also spoke of power. The Endimennarines were already the mightiest of men, but Sauron showed them how much mightier they could become. He taught them secrets of sorcery and war, techniques that enhanced their already formidable abilities. He encouraged them to expand their empire, to take what they wanted from the lesser peoples of Middle-earth without apology or restraint. And he introduced them to a new worship. The Endimennarines had always revered Ilúvatar the One, the creator of all things. But Sauron whispered that Ilúvatar was distant and uncaring, that he had abandoned men to death while lavishing immortality upon the elves. There was another power, Sauron said, a power Vatar had unjustly cast out, a power that would reward those who served him faithfully with all the things that El-Vatar denied. Morgoth, the worship of Morgoth, it began in secret among a few of Ar-Pharazôn's closest advisors. But it spread, as such things do, from the court to the nobility to the common people. Sauron had a temple built, a great dome of silver and black, where sacrifices were offered to the Lord of Darkness. At first, the sacrifices were animals. Then they were prisoners from Middle-earth. Then they were Endrel-Menelmureans themselves, Hifil, who still clung to the old ways, who still revered the Valar and refused to bow to Morgoth. The smoke of burning victims rose from that temple day and night, a visible sign of how far Menna had fallen. Sauron whispered to Ar-Pharazôn of immortality. He told him that the ban of the Valar was unjust, that the elves and the Valar kept the secret of eternal life for themselves out of jealousy and spite. He introduced the worship of Morgoth, promising that the Dark Lord would grant to his faithful servant what the Valar denied them. He had a great temple built, where human sacrifices were offered to Morgoth, where the smoke of burning victims rose into the sky and darkened the land. And at last, when Ar-Pharazôn had grown old and death was approaching, Sauron persuaded him to do the unthinkable. He convinced the king to build a vast armada and sail west, to assault the blessed realm itself, to take by force the immortality that the Valar would not grant. It was madness, it was blasphemy, and it was exactly what Sauron had planned. Let me tell you of those final days of Endor-Menna, for they are among the most terrible in all the history of the world. The great armament, as it came to be called, took years to prepare. Ar-Pharazôn stripped the forests of Enti-Menna to build his ships, emptied his treasuries to arm his soldiers, conscripted every able-bodied man into his forces. The island that had once been a garden became a vast military camp, dedicated entirely to the preparation for war against the gods. Sauron watched it all with cold satisfaction. Every tree that fell, every soldier that trained, every ship that launched brought Endor-Menelmureans closer to their doom. He knew what would happen when they set foot upon the blessed shores. He knew that the Valar would not simply stand aside and let their realm be conquered. And he knew that the response would be devastating. There were some who spoke against the madness. The faithful, those few who still honored the old ways, begged their king to reconsider. They pointed to the warnings that came with increasing frequency, the eagles that circled overhead, the clouds that gathered on the western horizon, the earth tremors that shook the island. They prophesied doom and destruction if the fleet sailed west. Ar-Pharazôn did not listen. He was too far gone in his prine's fear, too corrupted by Sauron's whispers, too desperate for the immortality he believed awaited him in the west. He ordered the faithful silenced, their leaders imprisoned or executed. Those who could not be silenced fled to their ships and sailed for Middle-earth, knowing that Endor-Menna was doomed and hoping only to save themselves and their families. When the armament was complete, Ar-Pharazôn himself stood at the head of it. He was old now, incredibly old, his life preserved only by the most powerful arts that Sauron could devise. But he was still the king, still the leader of the greatest military force the world had ever seen, and he would not delegate this final battle to any subordinate. The fleet sailed west, and the skies grew dark behind it. The Enti-Menelmurean fleet sailed west, the greatest armada the world had ever seen. They landed upon the shores of Aman, and for a moment it seemed that they might actually succeed in their impossible quest. But then the Valar laid down their guardianship of the world and called upon El-Vatar himself. The world was broken. The sea rose up and swallowed Endor-Menna whole. The island sank beneath the waves in a single day of destruction, its cities drowned, its towers cast down, its people killed by the millions. The great fleet was destroyed, its ships shattered by the convulsions of the sea and earth, and the shape of the world itself was changed. The straight road to Mol was removed from the circles of the world, placed beyond the reach of mortal vessels forever. Sauron's physical body was destroyed in the cataclysm. He had not expected of Vetar's direct intervention, had not foreseen the complete destruction of Endor-Menna. But his spirit survived, for he had bound too much of himself to the One Ring to be truly killed while it existed. He fled back to Mordor, a spirit of malice and hatred, and there he slowly rebuilt his power. He could never again take fair form. The destruction of his body in the downfall of Endemena had stripped him of that ability, had left him only with shapes of terror and dread. But he was still Sauron. He was still the Dark Lord, the creator of the One Ring, the master of the Nazgul, and he was not yet defeated. Some of the Enendu-Mengorines had survived. The faithful, those who had remained true to the valor even when their kings turned to darkness, had escaped the drowning in their ships. Led by Elendil the Tall and his sons Isildur and Anrian, they came to Middle-earth and established the kingdoms of Arna and North and Gondor in the south. These were strong realms, allies of the elves who remained in Middle-earth, and they stood against Sauron's renewed power. The last alliance was formed in the year 3040 of the Second Age. Gil-galad, High King of the Noldor, and Elendil, High King of the Dee Nadain, led their hosts against Mordor in the greatest military campaign since the War of Wrath. They fought their way across Middle-earth, defeated Sauron's armies in the Battle of Dagorlad, and laid siege to Barad-dûr itself. For 7 years, the siege continued. The forces of the Alliance surrounded the Dark Tower, cutting off supplies and reinforcements, slowly strangling Sauron's power. Many fell during those long years of siege, including Orion, Elendil's younger son, who was slain by a stone cast from the walls of Barad-dûr. Let me tell you of that siege, for it was one of the greatest military operations in the history of Middle-earth. The armies of the last alliance had fought their way across the whole of western Middle-earth to reach Mordor. They had defeated Sauron's forces in the great battle of Dagorlad, the Battle of the Dead Marshes, where so many fell that the marshes are haunted to this day by the spirits of the slain. They had broken through the Black Gate and entered Mordor itself, something that no army had accomplished since Sauron first claimed the land as his own. But Barad-dûr was not easily taken. The Dark Tower had built with all of Sauron's craft and power, its foundations laid in the fires of Mount Doom itself, its walls enchanted with sorceries that made them nearly impervious to assault. The Alliance tried everything: direct attacks, siege engines, tunneling beneath the walls, even attempts to scale the heights using ropes and ladders. Nothing worked. The tower stood impregnable, and from its heights, Sauron's servants rained down fire and stone and dark magic upon the besiegers. Year after year the siege continued. The Alliance suffered terribly. Disease and starvation took their toll. The constant attacks from within the tower killed many. Morale wavered as month followed month with no end in sight. Some began to whisper that the siege was hopeless, that they should retreat and try to contain Sauron rather than destroy him. But Gil-galad and Elendil would not hear of retreat. They knew that Sauron could not be contained forever, that he would eventually break free and spread his shadow across all of Middle-earth. They knew that this was their one chance, that if they failed here, there might never be another opportunity. And so they held, and they endured, and they waited for the moment that they knew must eventually come. At last, in the year 41 of the Second Age, Sauron himself came forth to do battle. Perhaps he believed that he could break the siege by striking at its leaders. Perhaps he was growing impatient, frustrated by the long years of confinement within his own tower. Perhaps he simply could not resist the opportunity to face his greatest enemies and to demonstrate his power, to crush their hopes with his own hands. Whatever his reasons, he descended from Barad-dûr and walked out to meet Gil-galad and Elendil on the slopes of Mount Doom. He was terrible to behold, the Dark Lord in the fullness of his power. He wielded weapons of terrible might, and the One Ring gleamed upon his finger. Against him stood Gil-galad with his spear Aedlos, and Elendil with his sword Narsil. The battle was fierce beyond telling, and both the High Kings fell. But in his death Elendil accomplished what he could not have done in life. Sauron was momentarily weakened, his defenses lowered, and Isildur, taking up the broken hilt of his father's sword, cut the One Ring from Sauron's hand. The Dark Lord fell, Without the ring, a part of Sauron's power was lost to him. His physical form was destroyed, his spirit cast out into the darkness, too weak to take shape again for many long years. The Nashel was scattered, driven into the shadows. Barad-dûr was cast down, its foundations broken. The realm of Mordor lay in ruins. The Second Age was ended, and it seemed that Sauron was destroyed forever. But Isildur kept the ring. This was his great error, his tragic mistake, the moment upon which so much of the subsequent history of Middle-earth would turn. Elrond and Theoden urged him to cast the ring into the fires of Orodruin, where it had been forged and where alone it could be destroyed. But Isildur refused. He claimed it as Rogeld for his father and brother, a treasure too precious to destroy. And so the One Ring passed into the possession of men, and with it passed the best chance the free peoples of Middle-earth ever have to end the threat of Sauron once and for all. Isildur did not keep the ring for long. Within 2 years he was dead, ambushed by orcs at the Gladden Fields. He tried to escape by putting on the ring and becoming invisible, but the ring betrayed him. It slipped from his finger at the crucial moment, revealing him to his enemies, and he was shot down in the waters of the Anduin. The ring sank with him into the river bed. The betrayal of Isildur deserves more consideration, for it reveals much about the nature of the ring and the cunning of its creator. Isildur had worn the ring for 2 years, had used it to make himself invisible on several occasions. He believed he understood it, believed he had mastered it. But the ring had been studying him just as carefully as he had been studying it. It knew his weaknesses, his fears, his moments of vulnerability, and it waited with all the patience of its maker for the perfect moment to strike. The ambush at the Gladden Fields was no accident. The orcs who attacked Isildur's party were drawn there by something more than chance, though whether the ring itself called to them, or whether some darker will guided them, I cannot say. What I do know is that when Isildur was most vulnerable, when he was swimming for his life in the cold waters of the Anduin, the ring chose its moment. It simply slipped off his finger. Rings do not normally fall from fingers, especially fingers that have worn them for 2 years and grown accustomed to their weight. But the One Ring was no ordinary ring. It had a will of its own, a cunning intelligence that had been inherited from its maker. And it had decided that Isildur was no longer useful, that remaining with him meant remaining hidden, remaining lost, remaining far from the hands of those who might use it to restore Sauron's power. So it betrayed him. The ring grew larger, or Isildur's finger grew smaller, or perhaps the ring simply willed itself to fall. However it happened, the ring slipped away and Isildur became visible, and the cross arrows found him. The ring sank to the bottom of the river and lay there, in the mud, waiting. It did not decay, it did not tarnish, it did lose its power. It simply waited, year after year, century after century, for someone to find it and carry it out of the darkness. For more than 2,000 years, the One Ring lay hidden in the mud. Let me tell you now of the Third Age, my friend. For it was in this age that I came to Middle-earth, and in this age that I came to know Sauron as an enemy rather than merely name from ancient history. The Third Age began with hope and ended with war. In the early centuries, the kingdoms of the Didi Nidain flourished. Arnasfur spread across the north, and Gondor grew mighty in the south. The elven realms endured, protected by the power of the 3 rings. There was peace of a sort, the kind of peace that exists when a great enemy is defeated but not destroyed. Sauron spent the first 1,000 years of the Third Age in hiding, a spirit without form, too weak to challenge his enemies direct. But he was patient. He had all the time in the world, for he could not truly die while the One Ring existed. And so he waited and recovered and planned. Around the year 1000, the Third Age, Sauron's shadow began to fall upon the world once more. He had gathered enough strength to take form again, and he established a stronghold in the southern reaches of Greenwood the Great. The fortress was called Dol Guldur, the Hill of Sorcery, and from it, a darkness began to spread through the forest, corrupting the trees and driving away the wholesome creatures. The elves who dwelt in the forest retreated northward, and the name of Greenwood was forgotten. Men began to call it Mirkwood instead. The transformation of Greenwood into Mirkwood was gradual but relentless. At first it was only the deepest parts of the southern forest that felt the shadow, places where sunlight rarely penetrated and where strange things had always lurked. But year by year the darkness crept northward, poisoning the soil, twisting the trees, filling the air with a heaviness that pressed upon the spirits of all who entered. The trees themselves changed. Where once they had stood tall and straight, reaching toward the light, now they bent and twisted, their branches tangling into impenetrable barriers, their roots breaking the paths that had once ruled the forest. Their bark grew black and diseased. Their leaves fell early, and in some places the trees seemed almost to move, to shift when one was not looking directly at them, to close in around travelers and trap them in endless mazes of identical trunks and strangling undergrowth. The creatures of the forest fled or changed. The deer and the foxes, the songbirds and the squirrels, these departed for healthier woods or died in the spreading corruption. In their place came things of darkness, great spiders descended from the spawn of Ungoliant, their webs stretching between the trees like sheets of pale death, their poisoned, paralyzing victims, or they were still conscious to feel themselves being devoured. Bats filled the upper canopy, their squeaks and rustlings creating a constant background of unease. Things moved in the undergrowth that no one could identify, things with too many legs or no legs at all. Things that watched with eyes that glowed faintly in the perpetual twilight. And at the heart of it all, Dol Guldur grew in power. The fortress had once been called Amon Lank, the Naked Hill, a place where trees refused to grow even before the shadow came. Now it was crowned with towers of black stone, walls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Gates that opened onto darkness so profound that even elven eyes could not penetrate it. Within those walls, Sauron slowly rebuilt his power, drawing to himself all the dark things that had survived from the elder days, planning his eventual return to Mordor and his acclamation of the Dark Tower. For centuries, no one knew who or what ruled in Dol Guldur. The power there was felt but not seen, a presence that weighed upon the land but refused to reveal itself. I investigated, as I told you before, creeping into the fortress in secret, searching for evidence of what had taken up residence there. And I found not certainty but suspicion, a gnawing fear that the shadow I felt was one I had known before, in ages long past. The White Council was formed to oppose the growing darkness. Saruman was its head, the eldest and wisest of Istari, or so we believed at the time. Galadriel and Elrond were among its members, and Círdan and myself. We debated what to do about the necromancer, as the power Dol Guldur was called. I urged immediate action, an assault on the fortress before whatever evil dwelt there could grow too strong to challenge. But Saruman counseled delay. He was certain, he said, that Sauron was destroyed, or at least so diminished that he could never pose a threat again. The necromancer was probably just some minor sorcerer, unworthy of the council's attention. I did not agree, but I was not the head of the council, and my voice was not the deciding one. So we waited and watched, and the darkness grew. It was during one of my visits to Dol Guldur that I found Tharain, father of Thorin Oakenshield, dying in the dungeons. The last of the 7 rings had been taken from him, and with that ring's capture, all 7 passed out of the possession of the dwarves forever. But Thorin gave me something before he died, a map and a key, the keys to a secret door into the Lonely Mountain. That map and key would lead to an adventure that seemed, at the time, to be a small thing, a private matter concerning dwarves and dragons. But it was not a small thing. It was part of a larger pattern, a web of events that Sauron was already weaving, a war that would engulf all of Middle-earth before it was done. The year was 2941 of the Third Age, when Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit of the Shire, set out with 13 dwarves to reclaim the Lonely Mountain from the dragon Smaug. I went with them, for I had my own purposes that had nothing to do with dragon gold. I will not tell you the full tale of that journey tonight, for it is a long story and would take many hours in the telling. But I will tell you that Bilbo found something in the deep places beneath the misty mountains, something that had been lost for more than 2,000 years, something that would change the fate of the world. He found the One Ring. He found it in the possession of a creature called Golem, who had held it for centuries, who had been twisted and corrupted by its influence into something scarcely recognizable as the Hobbit, like being he had once been. Bilbo took the ring, partly through luck, partly through the ring's own will, for the ring desired to be found, desired to return to the world, desired to make its way back to its master. At the same time, the White Council finally moved against Dol Guldur. Saruman could no longer delay action, and together we assaulted the fortress, driving out the necromancer. But we were too late. Sauron had foreseen our attack and had already fled to Mordor, to the dark tower of Barad-dûr that his servants had been secretly rebuilding for years. Our victory was hollow. We had driven the enemy from one fortress, but he had simply moved to another, stronger one. And he had left something behind, something I would only understand later. A seed of darkness in Dol Guldur that would continue to trouble the world for years to come. I began to suspect the truth about Bilbo's ring almost immediately. There was something about it that troubled me, something that reminded me of old tales and dark histories. But I did not know for certain, not yet. The One Ring had been lost for so long that most believed it would never be found, that it had been destroyed or carried out or buried so deep that no power could ever recover it. I spent years researching, years traveling to ancient libraries and consulting with the wise. I visited Minas Tirith, the great city of Gondor, and spent long hours in its archives. Searching for any record of the One Ring's appearance and powers, I spoke with Aragorn, the heir of Isildur, who was then a young ranger wandering the wild. I questioned Saruman, who had studied ring lore more deeply than any other, and I noted that his answers were evasive, his manner strange. And at last I knew. I knew with terrible certainty what Bilbo had found beneath the misty mountains. I knew what had been lurking in the share for 60 years, waiting, corrupting, calling out to its master. The realization struck me like a blow, and for a moment I could not move, could not think, could not breathe. The One Master Ring. The most terrible artifact in the history of Middle-earth. It had been found, had been carried out of the darkness and into the light, had been living in the pocket of a hobbit for more than half a century. And Sauron was searching for it. I understood now why the darkness in Mordor had grown so swiftly in recent years, why the Nazgûl had become bolder, why war seemed to be brewing on every front. Sauron had learned that the ring had been found. He did not know where it was, not precisely, but he knew that it was somewhere in the west, somewhere in the lands that had long been safe from his influence. And he was searching, reaching out with all his power, sending his servants to find the one thing that could restore him to his full might. If Sauron recovered the ring, all would be lost. Not might be lost, not probably would be lost. All would be lost, certainly, inevitably, completely. The ring would restore his power to its fullest, would allow him to dominate all the bearers of the lesser rings, would give him the strength to crush any opposition. Not even the elves, not even the Istari, not even all the free peoples of Middle-earth united together could stand against him if he reclaimed the ring. It had to be destroyed. There was no other option. The ring could not be hidden forever. It could not be used against Sauron, could not be wielded by anyone good without corrupting them utterly. It had to be unmade, dissolved back into the fire that had forged it, destroyed so completely that not even a memory of its power remained. But who could carry such a burden? Who could bear the ring all the way to Mordor, into the heart of Sauron's realm, to the very mountain where it had been made? The ring corrupted everyone who touched it. The stronger the bearer, the faster and complete the corruption. A great lord, an elven king, one of the Istari. Any of us would have been consumed by the ring's power long before we reached Mount Doom. The ring would have turned us into new Dark Lords, perhaps worse than Sauron himself, for we would have had both the ring's power and our own knowledge and abilities. But a hobbit, a simple, humble hobbit, with no great ambitions, no desire for power, no plans for conquest or domination. A hobbit might resist the ring's corruption, at least for a time. A hobbit might carry it where others could not. I came to Bagan on the night of Bilbo's 11th birthday party, and I saw the ring for myself. I saw how Bilbo clutched it, how his face changed when he spoke of it, how he called it his priest, in the same tone that Gollum had used. And I knew that the time had come, that the ring must be destroyed before Sauron could recover it. Bilbo left the Shire that night, leaving everything behind, including the ring. He was the first person in history to voluntarily give up a ring of power, and even he nearly failed at the last moment. The ring did not want to be abandoned. It fought him, whispered to him, showed him visions of all he would lose if he let it go. But Bilbo was made of sterner stuff than the ring expected, and in it he walked away. The ring passed to Frodo, Bilbo's nephew and heir, and I knew that Frodo would have to bear a burden that no one should ever have to bear, the burden of carrying the one ring to Mount Doom and casting it into the fires where it was made. Sauron had declared himself openly in Mordor by then. In the year 2951, just 10 years after Bilbo's adventure, the Dark Lord to Barad-dûr began rebuilding his power in earnest. The Nazgûl were sent forth once more, searching for the ring that had been lost so long ago. And Gollum, who had been captured and tortured in the dungeons of Mordor, had given them a name and a place. Baggins, Shire. The War of the Ring had begun, though most did not know it yet. The great armies had not marched, the battles had not been fought, but the war was already being waged in the shadows. In the councils of the wise, in the small and seemingly insignificant choices of hobbits and rangers and wandering wizards. You know the story of what followed, or at least the outline of it. The Fellowship was formed, 9 walkers to oppose the 9 riders. We set out from Rivendell bearing the fate of the world in a small gold ring. We passed through Moria, where I faced the Balrog and fell into shadow. We were scattered at Amon Hen, where Boromir fell trying to protect the hobbits of Saruman's Uruk-hai. Frodo and Sam went on alone toward Mordor, while the rest of the company fought their own battles against the forces of Isengard and Mordor. Let me tell you something of those final days, of what Sauron did and thought as his doom approached. Though I learned much of this only after the war was over, piecing together fragments of intelligence and the testimony of those who had glimpsed his mind. Sauron was not idle during the quest of the ring. He knew that the ring had been found, knew that his enemies possessed it, and he bent all his will toward its recovery. His armies mustered in Mordor, vast hosts of orcs and trolls and easterlings and Haradrim. His Nazgûl rode forth across the lands, searching, hunting, spreading terror wherever they went. His eye turned this way and that, peering into the shadows, seeking the small thing that held his power. But Sauron made a mistake, a fatal mistake born of his own nature. He could not imagine that anyone would try to destroy the ring. To Sauron, power was everything, the only thing that mattered, the only thing worth having. The idea that someone might voluntarily give up power, might seek to unmake the most powerful artifact in the world rather than use it, was literally unthinkable to him. His mind could not conceive of such a possibility. He assumed that his enemies would try to use the ring against him. He expected that some great lord would claim it, would harness its power, would march against Mordor at the head of an army enhanced by the ring's might. That was what he would have done had the situations been reversed. That was what anyone with sense would do, as far as Sauron could understand. So he prepared for that eventuality. He gathered his forces for a great battle, expecting his enemies to come to him. He fortified the Black Gate and the passes of Mordor. He readied his Nazgûl for the final confrontation, and he waited, confident in his preparations, certain that when the ringer finally revealed himself, Sauron would be ready. He never looked toward Mount Doom. He never considered that 2 small hobbits might be creeping through his realm to the one place where the ring could be destroyed. The very smallness of the hobbits, their insignificance, their complete lack of worldly power or ambition, made them invisible to his gaze. Sauron was looking for kings and warriors, for great lords and mighty armies. He was not looking for gardeners and burglars. This was his undoing. The strength of the enemy was also his weakness. Sauron's power, his intelligence, his vast resources, all of these were turned in the wrong direction, searching for a threat that would never come, while the real danger crept past unnoticed. And in the end, against all hope, Frodo succeeded. He carried the ring to Mount Doom, and though he failed at the last, though the ring's power overcame him at the very brink of the fire, he had made possible what no one else could have achieved. Gollum, that pitiful, wretched creature, bit the ring from Frodo's finger and fell with it into the flames. And the one ring was destroyed. Sauron fell. With the destruction of the ring, all of Sauron's power was dissipated at once. The Tower of Barad-dûr collapsed. The mountains of Mordor crumbled. The armies of the Dark Lord, bereft of the will that had driven them, scattered and fled. And Sauron himself, the spirit that endured for ages beyond counting, was finally and utterly destroyed. Let me tell you what it was like at the end, for I was there, standing before the Black Gate with the last remnant of the Free People's army, facing Sauron's final host. I felt the moment when the ring was destroyed. Felt it as a shockwave that passed through the very fabric of reality. Felt Sauron's presence, which had been a constant pressure on the edges of my mind for centuries, suddenly vanish. The eye of Sauron, that great lidless eye of fire that had been fixed upon us from the heights of Barad-dûr, wavered. It searched this way and that, seeking something it could no longer find, and then it began to fade, like a flame being blown out by a wind from beyond the world. The tower shook. Great blocks of stone that had stood for thousands of years cracked and fell. The dark walls of Barad-dûr, which had risen again and again despite every assault, began to crumble from within, as if the malevolence that had held them together was withdrawing, leaving nothing but dead stone behind. The Nazgûl screamed. Even from miles away we could hear their cries, terrible sounds of anguish and loss, as the ties that had bound them to Sauron for so long suddenly snapped. They wheeled their fell beasts toward Mount Doom, toward the place where their master's power was being destroyed, but they were too late. The mountain erupted in fire and lightning, and the Nazgûl, caught in the conflagration, would consume their forms, burning away like shadows in the light of the sun. And Sauron, what happened to Sauron in that final moment? I can only describe what I felt through the bond that all the Astari shared with the spiritual realm. There was a reaching, a grasping, a desperate attempt to hold on to existence, even as the foundation of that existence was destroyed. Sauron's spirit, which had survived so many defeats, so many destructions of his physical form, tried one last time to escape, to find some anchor in the world, some remnant of power to cling to. But there was nothing. The ring had been his anchor, his refuge, the vessel that held the greater part of his power for more than 3,000 years. With the ring destroyed, there was nothing left for his spirit to hold on to. It dispersed, scattered, dissolved into the wind like smoke from a fire that has finally burned out. He will not return, unlike Morgoth, who was cast into the void but may one day break free. Sauron is truly gone. He poured so much of himself into the ring that when the ring was destroyed, there was nothing left of him to survive. His spirit dissipated into the wind like smoke, like a dark cloud blown away by a cleansing wind. He is ended, finished, gone forever from the circles of the world. This is the story of Sauron, my friend. The story of Maren who became Sauron, of the servant of all who became the lieutenant of Morgoth, of the fair deceiver who became the Dark Lord. It is a story of pride and corruption, of great gifts turned to evil purposes, of a spirit that might have been among the mighty servants of the light but instead became the shadow that nearly engulfed the world. What lessons can we draw from this long and sorrowful history? First, perhaps we might consider the nature of corruption. Sauron did not become evil in a single moment. His fall was gradual, a slow drift away from the light, a series of small compromises that eventually added up to something monstrous. He began by listening to Melkor's whispers. Then he began to agree with them. Then he began to serve the one who spoke them. Each step seemed small at the time, each choice seemed insignificant, but together they led him into darkness from which there's no return. This is how evil works, my friend. It rarely announces itself with trumpets and banners. It creeps in through the small cracks, the tiny compromises, the moments when we tell ourselves that just this once, just in this small matter, we can bend our principles without breaking them. Be wary of those moments. They are more dangerous than any orc army or dragon, for they attack from within where our defenses are weakest. Second, we might consider the nature of power. Sauron desired power above all things. He wanted to impose order upon the world, to make all things conform to his vision of how they should be. And in pursuit of that power, he sacrificed everything else to his honor, his beauty, his very identity. By the end, he had become nothing but a will to dominate. An eye that watched and sought and grasped but could never be satisfied. Power is not evil in itself, but the desire for power, when it becomes the ruling passion of one's existence, corrupts everything it touches. Sauron's love of order became a hatred of freedom. His desire for efficiency became contempt for all beings who did not serve his purposes. His pursuit of control left him, in the end, controlled by his own creation, bound to the ring as surely as the ring was bound to him. Third, we might consider the nature of fear. Sauron was not without fear. He feared the Valar's judgment, which is why he refused to return to Valinor when Inann offered him the chance. He feared Morgoth's punishment, which is why he hid when Elgi Theon defeated him at Tol in Garth. He feared the power of the Enumeng-Rians, which is why he surrendered to Ar-Pharazôn rather than fight a battle he could not win. His whole strategy was built around fear, the fear he inspired in others, and the fear he felt in his own dark heart. Fear is a poor master. It may drive you to cunning, but it blinds you to wisdom. It may make you cautious, but it also makes you cruel. Sauron's fear of failure led him to commit atrocities that ensured his actual defeat. His fear of humiliation led him to reject the one chance he had for redemption. In the end, fear consumed him as surely as the fires of Mount Doom consumed his ring. And finally, perhaps most importantly, we might consider what defeated Sauron in the end. It was not great armies, though great armies played their part. It was not powerful magic, though power was certainly involved. It was not the wisdom of the elves or the strength of men or the craft of dwarves, though all of these contributed. What defeated Sauron was love. Frodo's love for his friends, which drove him to accept a burden that should have been impossible to bear. Sam's love for Frodo, which kept him faithful even when hope seemed gone. Aragorn's love for Arwen, which gave him the strength to face Sauron's armies at the Black Gate. The fellowship that bound the company together, the lord that made them willing to die for one another. And yes, even Gollum's twisted love for the ring, which in the end proved to be the instrument of its destruction. For Gollum's obsession led him to follow Frodo into the heart of Mordor, led him to attack at the very moment when Frodo's will failed, led him to seize the ring and fall with it into the fires where it was made. Sauron never understood love. He understood domination, and he understood fear, and he understood the cold calculations of power. But love was beyond him, a force he could not command, control, or even comprehend. And in the end, that incomprehension was his undoing. The fire has burned low now, and the night has grown deep around us. I have talked for many hours, and my voice is growing weary. But I hope that this tale has been of some use to you, that it has given you understanding, and perhaps even wisdom. Remember Sauron, my friend. Remember what he was and what he became. Remember that the mighty spirits can fall, that the fairest faces can hide the darkest hearts, that evil does not always announce itself, but often creeps in through doors we leave carelessly open. But remember also that evil can be defeated. Remember that love is stronger than hate, that hope is more powerful than fear, that the small and the humble can accomplish what the great and the mighty cannot. Remember that Sauron, for all his power and ages of planning, was defeated by a hobbit, a creature so insignificant that the Dark Lord never even considered that it might pose a threat. The world is not as dark as sometimes seems, The shadow passes, the sun rises, and those who hold true to what is good and right, who love one another and stand together against the darkness, they will prevail in the end. Sleep now, my friend. Let the story settle into your dreams. Tomorrow is another day, and it will bring its own challenges and its own opportunities for courage and kindness. But tonight you have earned it. The tale of Sauron is ended. He will trouble the world no more. And though other shadows may arise in ages yet to come, though evil will never be entirely vanquished from the hearts of those who walk under sun and moon, the victory that was won against the Dark Lord will never be forgotten. It will shine as a beacon in the darkness, a reminder that even in the darkest hour, hope remains. Good night, dear friend, and may your dreams be peaceful. The fire crackles one last time and settles into glowing embers. The shadows in the room grow softer, gentler, and outside the round windows, the stars shine down. The same stars that shone when the world was young, the same stars that will shine when all these tales are ancient history. The same stars that watched Sauron rise and fall and rise again, until at last he was no more. The story is told, the night is deep, and somewhere in the vast reaches of time, a new dawn is always waiting. Rest now, rest and remember, and when you wake, carry these stories with you not as burdens, as gifts, not as warnings, but as wisdom. For that is why we tell tales in the darkness, not to frighten, but to illuminate, not to despair, but to hope. Sauron is gone, the ring is destroyed, and the world, for all its sorrows, is still a place of beauty and wonder, friendship and love, of courage and sacrifice. Sleep well, my friend, sleep well, and when you wake, remember that you too have a part to play in the great story that is still being written. Your choices matter, your kindness matters, your courage, however small, matters. Be the light that drives back the darkness. Be the love that defeats hate. Be the hope that refuses to die. That is the lesson of Sauron's fall. That is the wisdom that the ages have taught us. There is one more thing I would have you remember, one more thought to carry with you into your dreams. Sauron was not born evil. He was created good, created to serve the light, created with gifts that might have made him one of the greatest spirits in all of creation. His fall was a choice, a series of choices, each one leading him further from what he was meant to be. He was not predestined for darkness. He walked into it step by step, choice by choice, until he could no longer see the light from which he had turned away. This is both a warning and a hope. It is a warning because it reminds us that anyone can fall. Great gifts are no protection against corruption. Indeed, they make corruption more likely. For those with great power have more opportunities to misuse it, more temptations to believe that they know better than others, more capacity to impose their will upon the world. Sauron's skills, his intelligence, his organizational genius, all of these became tools of evil when his heart turned from the light. Your own gifts, whatever they may be, could become the same if you are not vigilant. But it is also a hope because it reminds us that evil is not natural. Evil is a deviation, a corruption, a departure from what was meant to be. The darkness that covers the world is not the way things are supposed to be. It is an aberration, a wound, something that could be healed if we have the courage and the perseverance to heal it. Sauron chose evil, yes, but that means that he could have chosen otherwise. And if he could have chosen otherwise, then so can anyone else who faces the same temptation. This is the great truth that underlies all the tales of Middle-earth, that evil is not omnipotent, that the darkness can be defeated, that hope is never foolish even when it seems most desperate. Sauron seemed unstoppable in his power, but he was stopped. Morgoth seemed invincible in his might, but he was overthrown. Every Dark Lord, every shadow, every nightmare that has ever threatened the world has eventually been faced and overcome by those who refuse to surrender. And that is enough. Good night. May the stars shine upon your rest, and may the morning find you ready for whatever adventures await. The story is ended, but the story never truly ends. It only pauses, waiting for new tellers and new listeners, new heroes and new hopes. Until we meet again, my friend, until we meet again. The last embers of the fire fade to ash, and the darkness grows soft and warm around you. The gentle breathing of the night outside seems to whisper ancient secrets, melodies half remembered from before the making of the world. And in that comfortable darkness, with the tale still echoing in your mind, you drift toward sleep, toward dreams, toward whatever adventures await you in the beyond waking. Sauron is gone, but you are here. And as long as there are those who remember, those who tell stories by firelight, those who believe in the power of good to overcome evil, the darkness can never truly win. Sleep now. Sleep, and be at peace. The world is safer tonight than it was before, and tomorrow it will be safer still. Good night. Good night. And with those words, silence soft as snow, gentle as starlight, deep as the foundations of the world, the fire is out, the story is told, and the night wraps itself around you like a blanket, warm and protective, carrying you gently toward the shores of sleep. Rest well, dear listener. Rest well, dear friend. The tale of Sauron from Mara the Dark Lord is complete, and in its telling, in its remembering, in its passing from voice to ear and heart to heart, the darkness is diminished and the light grows stronger. This is the power of stories. This is the magic that no ring can contain, no dark lord can destroy. Remember, and rest. The morning will come, it always does, and when it does, you will be ready. Good night, the end. But of course, it is never truly the end. For as long as there are stars in the sky and stories to tell, as long as there are those who gather in the firelight to listen and to wonder, as long as there are hearts that beat with love and courage and hope, the tale goes on. It goes on in you, dear listener, in your choices and your kindnesses, in your dreams and your determination. The story of Middle-earth is not just ancient history. It is a living thing, and you are part of it. So sleep now, and dream of what you will do when you wake. Dream of the light you will bring into the world. Dream of the darkness you will help to banish. And know that you are not alone. Know that others have walked this path before you, and others will walk it after. Know that the great story continues, and that you have been given the honor of adding your own chapter to its pages. This is the gift of the tales we tell. Not just entertainment, not just instruction, but invitation. An invitation to be part of something greater than ourselves. An invitation to join the fellowship of those who stand against the darkness. Accept the invitation, dear friend. Accept it and see what wonders await. Good night, and may all your journeys be blessed. The fire has gone out completely now, and the room is dark save for the faint glow of starlight through the round windows. The air is still and peaceful, carrying the scent of wood smoke and pipe weed and the indefinable sweetness of a hobbit hole at rest. You are safe here, warm. You are loved. And tomorrow, when the sun rises and the birds begin to sing, you will rise too, refreshed and renewed, ready to face whatever challenges the new day brings. But that is tomorrow. Tonight, there is only this: the darkness, the peace, the gentle whisper of memory and dream. Rest now. Rest. The story will be here when you wake. Good night, dear listener. Good night. And so the tale of Sauron comes to its close, whispered in a hobbit hole while the fire burns low, and the world outside sleeps beneath the watching stars. It is a tale of darkness, yes, but also of the light that defeated the darkness. It is a tale of evil, but also of the good that overcame it. It is a tale of despair, but also of the hope that refused to die. Remember it, treasure it, pass it on. For stories are the way we fight the darkness, the way we keep the light alive, the way we connect ourselves to all who came before and all who will come after. Sauron is gone, but the story remains. And in the story, there is everything we need: courage to face our fears, wisdom to guide our choices, love to warm our hearts, hope to light our way. Sleep now, wrapped in these gifts. Sleep and be at peace. The morning will come. The story will continue. And you, dear friend, will be there to help tell it. Good night, good night, good night. And with that, only silence remains, the soft, contented silence of a tale well told and a listener well rested. The kind of silence that is not empty but full, brimming with all the words that have been spoken and all the dreams that are yet to be dreamed. Rest in that silence, dear friend. Let it hold you and heal you and prepare you for whatever comes next. The tale of Sauron is ended, but your story is just beginning. Good night.